Welcome to If Prices Could Talk. We are doing today pricing in the news. So this is a rundown of headlines. We'll go through each one and talk about what happened, what the story is telling us, and potential trends based off of what we've seen in surrounding either client things or just general moving from B2C to B2B kind of implications and takeaways from these headlines. So starting point, so I'll just go through each of these one by one and we'll kind of debrief. The first headline here is in the Wall Street Journal. The headline is "Why Your Starbucks Frappuccino is Now Half Price." Punchline, here's the answer, or what the article says, is that surging inflation is forcing Americans to rethink their spending. So this article kind of walks through, just for people that, I'll put the link in here but just for people that are watching. The idea is that Starbucks has been running more promotions lately. It cites this month, for the first time in more than a decade, they started offering bundles of coffee and breakfast food for $5. So let's just start with, do you think that's really what's going on here? Is this an inflation-related casualty?
Well, I have my opinions. Should I go first?
Why don't you start?
I'll start. So I really thought this was kind of a lazy writer's excuse for what's happening with Starbucks, because in reality the consumer spending is strong, and it's been strong for like 24 months. So there isn't a loss of spending. So and that's why we have the economic issues we have, right? Is they can't figure out that spending is going up and it's strong even while interest rates are going up, and that typically doesn't happen. So we're waiting for that to curb the consumer spending in order to start bringing that interest rate down to punch the economy up again. So that doesn't seem to be happening. So for this writer to assume that it's inflation that's causing it, I just don't know if that's true. I think what's really happening is you've got a market that has a strong coffee demand and drink demand that's out there, but you have competitors that have come into the market. It's no longer Starbucks creating this market segment. There's so many other people that are coming into this market that there's true competition that's out there. And now Starbucks is trying to differentiate themselves. They're already a well-known commodity that's out there, but they're trying to get those footfalls. They're trying to get these folks to come in and spend more of those dollars within their four walls. So I think a promotion is a great way to do it, because they are just at that market stage of this beverage category. And I think it's just a function of where we are, rather than isolating it to inflation and people curbing back their spending.
There's sort of a flanking product aspect to this, where if you're a person that has your double-digit latte, quad shot, whatever it is, that's not part of the promotion. So those types of consumers are still going to spend the same, just like they were before. They're probably not going to change their behavior. Whereas I think maybe they're trying to appeal to some consumers who are looking at other opportunities to move their business elsewhere, or discretionary spending is, for some segment of the population, is certainly squeezed. And if you're going to still have them spend their discretionary dollars, you need to make an option that fits for them.
Jeet, what you're saying is the value of Starbucks relative to the slew of other options that are out there to get a cup of coffee, whether it's local coffee shops, making it home via a fancy coffee maker, etc., that's changed over time, right? That's changed in the past, 20 plus years since Starbucks has become really, really mainstream. The question in my mind is, as a result of this strategy, it feels like this is an effort to segment the market in a right way, so they can continually capture the maximum value per market segment. But what I found interesting is they're doing it, really, my understanding is that the promotions are via their app. So it's likely going to be hitting their most loyal customers. So the question in my mind is that capturing value in the right market segment, or is it offering a discount to customers that perhaps would have bought in any case? Is it really pushing the right behavior, or is it unnecessarily discounting? And it's a really, really hard thing to do in their market, because there's a lot of price transparency.
Or do you think they're getting the kids on TikTok, and then the kids go to the parent, and then the parent sees it in the app, and it all kind of connects that way? I don't know.
Well, they're pushing volume. I could see that for sure.
Right.
I was talking to you guys earlier, and we stopped at Starbucks yesterday with 3 kids in tow, and walk in within seconds. Every single one of them knew exactly what they wanted, all different drinks, all of which I've never heard of. So there's another element that perhaps is coming into play, and this is anecdotal, right? Nothing to do with like data or the actual article, but perhaps they're going and trying to expand their market segment, which I think is another logical play, since a family walks in, or say a couple parents walk into Starbucks, their kids are going to want something, and you have something that appeases their needs. And the reality is it's just tough to say no when two adults are buying coffee, but there's other things that kids would want. So maybe there's another element where we say, okay, now we are not only appealing to folks that are buying coffee, but anybody else that's 18 and under that might want another type of beverage, snack, etc.
Big pop.
It's your comment, Adnan, about the app is an interesting one, right? One is we say this to our clients all the time. Stop giving discounts to people that already buy from you, because all you're doing is taking away your profitability. Use a discount for a purpose if that's what you're going to do it for. And I wonder in this scenario, is it a futile effort to give discounts to Tracy, who goes to Starbucks twice a day, and is going to do that regardless? Or is it because they're going to increase their membership of the app? Because I believe in the app, you get to store the dollars, right? I don't use it.
Yeah, you load it like a gift card. You have to load
right?
it 25, 50 or whatever.
So Starbucks, in essence, is able to monetize that and is able to get some type of, even if you say they get 4% interest on it, right? 4% interest on all the dollars that are saved on their app is probably pretty significant. So if they can get app growth or membership growth, regardless of what they sell, it doesn't really matter. They're getting that interest return, and that could be worth it for the promotions, and that's their break even. That's there.
Could also be that the data in the app, like they're able to get granular data via the app that could help their efforts in terms of going to market. So if they've quantified the value of that, point being, I think the same point, meaning that is it a strategy to incentivize app usage, which could be beneficial in a number of different ways.
Yeah, that's interesting.
In the next quarterly report, does the app usage go up?
Yeah.
Right.
Do they report that? I'm curious whether they.
I don't even know.
Yeah, I would love to see that if it does. Maybe that's something we should track. If prices could track, if prices could talk, it's going to turn into prices could track, get tracked.
All right, interesting. No matter what, the bottom line is this does not appear to be inflation.
No, that's a bit lazy.
Okay. Next up, so this is from Subscription Insider. The headline is Google enforces regional pricing, cancels YouTube premium subscriptions purchased via VPNs. So the idea here is that you sign up for YouTube premium. You can pay, I think it's like $13.99 a month in the US. People were starting to go on VPN and sign up for accounts in other countries because it was cheaper. So like some countries in Africa, for example, were under $1 a month. And then if you do it for a whole year, you can save a couple $100 by signing up somewhere else and pretending that you live there. That was the whole idea here. So somehow I'd love to imagine like some group of analysts being like, man, we're blowing up in Zimbabwe. What is going on? And trying to figure out like what was happening. So the idea here is like YouTube picked up on it. When I was looking into it, there was like all these Reddit threads of people showing how to do this. And then obviously they got caught somehow and YouTube was like, all right, enough. So no longer can you sign up via VPN for a YouTube premium account. And I guess like my first question on this is what does this say about regional pricing? Like, is this an occupational hazard for something like this where people are always going to find a loophole? And companies have to figure out how to demand the integrity of the fences? Like, what does this tell you?
It really is. It's like a pricing 101 case of the fences between packages or users. And in this case, people found a way around it, and enough people found a way around it that they wanted to do something about it. I wouldn't be surprised if YouTube knew all along that these were VPN users that were signing up in other countries, but they just treated it like a Netflix subscription that was an account that was shared between 5 people. And they're like, great, I'm glad they're paying something versus nothing. Maybe at some point now they're like, okay, now it's sticky enough that they can start charging, or they felt like maybe they could track people that were cannibalizing their normal subscription and moving over to another country, and then they decided to do something about it. But I feel like there's always going to be a cat and mouse game and that type of thing, in terms of with digital especially, it's probably going to find people that are able to hack around it.
This is a scenario where there's price transparency in the market. So people caught on to the fact that there's certain countries where you're buying the exact same thing for a cheaper price, and which then creates an incentive to do exactly what folks were doing, meaning go get a VPN and find a cheaper way to get it. So as a result of the pricing strategy they've created an incentive for this behavior. And the reality is that there's a lot of businesses out there that segment the market in such ways, meaning they charge different prices for the same product. The airline industry is a common one that we refer to, because if you buy a plane ticket from point A to point B, depending on when you buy it or a litany of other factors, the price just changes. In this case, like Pete was saying, I think the analogy of creating this kind of cat and mouse type of a game is exactly the risk, because you put these protections in place, and then the users, because that incentive exists, can just continually try to explore other ways to get around a VPN. I don't know exactly what those are, whether it's password sharing or some other mechanisms, but then there's always going to be that kind of enforcement and the back and forth between it. So it's a super interesting article, and I'm kind of with you where the discovery of this, the enforcement of this, the analysis of this is fascinating. But being able to create the right fences where you can effectively enforce them is really important to any pricing strategy. And in this case, it feels like from a long-term perspective, it's going to be really tough to enforce them.
I was just thinking, like, it's interesting, like the B2B analogy of stuff that we see. You could think of a premium consulting service that is, you're only going to get it if you pay for it. That's sort of like, in theory, the one thing. You're going to have a hard time hacking around it for free. But where we do see it a lot is whatever preferential terms, which could be, a volume discount for a committed volume that never gets met and nobody watches it and enforces it. And that sort of could be applied to any sort of service or premium preferential treatment. And without the enforcement mechanism with hindsight, that's always kind of an audit or enforcement issue that we see rear its head, that you get these customers that enjoy benefits that they don't pay for or earn.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to both of you guys. I think to answer your question, Tracy, the first question you asked, which is regional pricing, it's been there from the beginning of time. So I think it's going to continue being there. Technology is just one way of doing it, and there's going to be workarounds, and there's always been workarounds. Even flight, I think, Adnan, you mentioned flight in just point A to point B, but you buy the same leg of flight from Europe, it's going to be a different price than if you buy the same leg here from the US. You're on different networks and they're going to charge differently. So flights are one way that you can switch VPNs and get cheaper flights if you book it through Asia or you book it through Europe, European VPN. So compared to the US. So I think those things exist, and people are always trying to shut down those types of workarounds. And I think with technology, it's just always going to be there. So I think they're doing the right thing, YouTube. I think once they figure out that there's nothing they can do, or the problem is bigger than they thought, I think that's when it gets into, should you have a flanking product for those regions? Should you do some type of differentiation from a product development perspective that truly fences off that you're not going to be able to go get that, or you're going to get an inferior product where they're not going to charge as much for, whatever it might be. It's going to push you to go there. But the VPN usage is something technology-wise they can track, identify, stop. They can have the right governance model, right checks and balances, a cat and mouse game. So I think right now, everything is sort of in control and within the limits of what they should be doing to make sure that integrity of the prices are out there. But in the future, that could change, and that could force them to do product variations in order to protect themselves.
More ads.
Yeah, could be.
It's just price discrimination. You're gonna have all these kids making their fake IDs to get the senior discount on the subway.
All right, next up. Okay, so this is the Verge headline is Apple's Vision Pro team is reportedly focused on building a cheaper headset. So we talked about this a couple months ago. Jeet is vindicated. But at the time, okay, so this was like when this came out, it's not like sales were bad, but people complained about the clunkiness, the weight of the headset, and it seemed like they used it for a little bit, and then it was like, what am I going to do with this? At that point, one of the things that came through was I remember Jeet saying, like, these people are not true early adopters. The price point was $34.99. It sounds like Apple is still launching the headset throughout Europe and internationally this month and in the coming months. So we can talk about that. And then we can also talk about this new version, which they are aiming to ship by the end of 2025. So should we revisit your initial comments first, Jeet, and just like, what are your thoughts given what you said at that time?
Well, I think the major point is they're stopping that development, right?
Yeah.
They're no longer going after that. They're going to try to come up with a low cost solution or product, which we knew that's where they were going to end up because that's the mass market, right? I mean, that's the market they need to be going after. They're not going to sell too many. So that's why I was so confused by their price point, because that price point is within reach of a lot of different types of consumers. And that's why they were kind of getting a mixed bag. They could have doubled that price and they could have focused their attention on that leading edge, that sort of early adopter market. And they could have had the same outcome that's there. That's where they are now. And I think they made a mistake on that price point. If they had priced it better, they could have isolated that leading edge, that early adopter. And then now they could be coming out with a product variation that goes after the mass market. So now they're kind of going in and saying, hey, we're going to stop production of this type. We're going to stop. So it almost feels like, looks like, and they're marketing it as they're removing themselves from the direction that they were going into before. And they're changing directions. That's what it seems like in the way they're writing it. When in fact they maybe, I don't know if they're going to change some of the features and functionality and kind of go a different direction, maybe. But the key is they need to be able to go after the mass market, where, by the way, there are other players already in there and players that are doing well in that space. So they're going to do well. I mean, they obviously have great products. So I'm not saying that they're not going to do well, but they're going into a competitive space now, where before they weren't in as competitive of a space.
I read something, a meme online saying that it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago that Apple Vision Pro was released a year ago and the world has changed, but Apple Vision Pro has had nothing to do with that change. Point being that there just hasn't been a lot of adoption, and I think your argument is that going in, they should have known there wasn't a lot of adoption just because the use cases are largely undefined. So why not just start price high, and you'll essentially get the same number of people that are buying, and then it starts to stand out as a differentiated product. So I think that's a fair argument. What comes to my mind is what I want to see from a future perspective is really to get a better sense of what the true use case is. I continue to think that from a use case perspective, once they start to prove it out and prove the value, that's when you start to see adoption. Because I feel like the value right now is unknown. People get this thing and you're like, it's cool, but what do I actually do with this thing? Do I use it on a plane to watch movies? Is that better than watching a movie on my phone? Can I use it for work? Can I use it for collaboration, etc.? Once they start to define that and then like people start to use the value, I think there is significant potential for adoption, particularly because as a result of it being an Apple product, they get a head start on that software development just because Apple has that ecosystem and the potential for integration with the range of other Apple products out there, meaning that from a behavioral perspective, people are used to going out there and getting and having app stores. It integrates well with a MacBook. So if they can start to prove out the use case, for example, from integrating it from a work perspective to say, hey, you can easily collaborate with your team members, or you can way easier produce, say, videos using this thing. Instead of having 2 monitors, you in essence have unlimited monitors in front of you, and that's going to enhance creativity from a work perspective, and these are the results you're going to get. Once that starts to happen, that's when I think that they start to prove out the value, and then you can start to really see a well built out go to market strategy. Whereas now, I don't think they know what the go to market strategy is because they don't know what the value of this thing is.
The thing, Adnan, that I'm worried about, so obviously I totally 100% agree with what you're saying, that they have the ecosystem, they need to get that use case and all that. But remember, the problem that they have is the fees they charge, and they don't have an open platform. They have a closed platform. So they're getting in trouble in Europe. Apple's getting in trouble all over the place. I don't know how you bring out a brand new leading edge technology, right? And not have it be open platform so you can build and create use cases to drive that adoption. So if you have a closed environment, you're not opening it up, you're charging ridiculous prices where open source developers don't want to develop on your platform. They don't want to develop games. They don't want to develop work productivity tools. They don't want to do any of that stuff because they want to go over to Android because it's open. It's much easier to start innovating over there. So why would you do that and give up dollars? The only reason is you've got a great user base, right? So you're intoxicated by that user base to be able to go after it. But unless Apple opens that up to development, I don't think they're going to be able to get that use case and that adoption that they need to really be able to optimize in that mass market like they did with previous products, with this product.
Yeah, I think it's going to be dependent on who the developers they're targeting are, meaning that if it's corporations that they're targeting to develop, they'll pay those fees because the assumption is they can get volume there and they can afford those fees. Whereas if it's like, say, developers that are developing apps from the ground up without a whole lot of funding, then it's going to be, to your point, significantly tougher because you're held by these app store fees, which you can argue in many cases are egregious, and that's where they're getting a lot of pushback on from even
and the second one is where most of those use cases get developed, right? You have a limit, a theoretical TAM with corporations. With the consumer base, that's where the real sort of drivers are.
100%. Disruption starts at the low end of the market, to your point. That's a fair point, yes.
I think to some degree, Apple did try the really high price. I mean, they're set next to the Meta Quest 3 price with the original headset for Apple. And then even with this new stripped down version, it's still going to be like 5x. So without a defined use case, I don't think the stripped down version is going to be successful either. I think the whole market is a nothing burger right now.
Last one. This is the Associated Press. So the headline is car dealerships in North America revert to pens and paper after cyber attacks on software provider. So the company CDK Global, they provide software for auto dealers in the US and Canada, and they were hit by back-to-back cyber attacks in June. So the first attack, the first one happened, they shut down all their systems and then came back up. And the second one happened within a few days of each other. So the outage had a big impact, obviously. There's this one guy in the interview who's like, well, those of us with a bit more salt and pepper in our hair remember how to do the paper invoices. I'm like, this guy, he's like had his moment. I got this.
I've been waiting for this day.
So I think the starting place for this one, like events like this probably on so many levels have such a big impact on a company like that and the industry, trust in the company, all kinds of things. But how does something like this impact pricing?
It's going to increase security, IT, and cyber as a value driver for all these different systems. I mean, car dealerships in the grand scheme of things, it's more of a pain in the butt to have a paper invoice, and it takes a little longer to get that paperwork through. But when it hits and locks down health systems, it's critical. And I think there's been billing issues in healthcare as well. So I think that's probably a more critical use case. But I think that's probably the biggest story for me is it's going to, from a product perspective, increase the importance of what consumers and businesses are looking for when they make a decision. And they'll think about what are the risks if I buy this? Like, what am I opening myself up to, as opposed to just, is it solving the immediate problem that I've got?
I just find it fascinating that these software platforms they're so widely adopted, and the benefit is just so big versus going back to pen and paper, that there's going to be this inherent risk of cybersecurity attacks, but relative to the value that it's providing, in the grand scheme of things, it's likely worth it. The question is going to become, from a future perspective, if the frequency of these cyber attacks goes up, do we get to the point where it's not as worth it to adopt these technology solutions? It feels unlikely. And then that gets back to Pete's point where, you want to start to fill in that gap via solutions that are going to minimize that risk. But again, similar to some of the comments we made earlier on with YouTube having to enforce VPN, it's going to be this perpetual cat and mouse game because security is going to get better, hackers are going to get better, security is going to get better, etc. So it's going to keep happening. But the only reason to continue using a solution like CDK or any other tech-oriented solution where there is some cybersecurity risk is because the value of using that solution is more than the risk of and the financial impact of an attack. The challenge with risk is that the risk is so hard to predict because you don't know exactly what that cost is going to be. So you're making a long-term bet that's going to pay off.
Whoever's transacting in the digital world has to protect its users, has to do these things. Otherwise, I think going back to your question, Tracy, I think it hits pricing from the perspective of what Pete said, which is the importance of value driver from a risk mitigation, from cybersecurity perspective. But I also think it changes demand. So demand fundamentally starts shifting and changing because of these things. So I bet people that were going to go buy a car said, hey, can I postpone this for another 30 days or 60 days? I don't want to sit in the waiting room for an hour. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. Let's just hold off a little bit. Let's wait till the next end of the month or whatever, if we can kind of ride out the car that we have. So obviously some people can't, which is fine. They'll still go in. And others that can push off that demand will probably do that. So I think with these types of events, the shift in demand is what's probably the big driver from a pricing perspective.
All right, well, let's stop there. We'll do another one of these next month. And thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, see you guys.